Sleeping in a hammock and using a hammock system for a shelter option for backpacking is becoming more popular than ever. And today I want to talk about my personal experience with a hammock system and share with you 6 things that I wish I knew sooner about using a hammock system for backpacking. Now, when it comes to sleeping in a hammock, I can count on one hand the number of nights that I have actually used a hammock system that is meant for backpacking in the backcountry. My experience is just at that level of beginner status that I feel like sharing my personal experience at that level is important to help you understand that there are times within backpacking you still can feel like a beginner. The example that we're going to use for today's conversation is my Hammock Gear Wanderlux system. This is a Hammock Gear hammock, and then I've got Hammock Gear insulation in a top quilt and a underquilt, and then a Dyneema tarp that goes with the whole system. So let's jump into item number 1, and that is I wish I knew that my backpack is going to pack differently than it has before. So I've got a pack here all ready to go for a trip, and this has my sleeping bag, my shelter, which is a freestanding tent, and then a sleeping pad. And with the hundreds of times that I have packed my backpack, I know how this works. I know exactly where I want things placed, but with a hammock system, oh boy, things change. Things just become more complicated for me because now I've got 2 pieces of insulation, and instead of putting one sleeping bag in the bottom of my pack in a horizontal position, I'm now adding insulation 2 times. And so that becomes a lot of height, that becomes a lot of space that is taken up in my backpack. And these are 20-degree rated underquilt and top quilt. This is going to potentially require me to carry maybe a slightly larger pack. And in the case that I've been out with this system, a 40-liter pack did end up working, but I needed to put my insulation side by side vertically this way for it to work better than having it in a horizontal position. So in addition to that, you've just got more pieces. You've got your hammock, you've got your tarp, you've got suspension for the whole hammock system, and just more pieces in general than using a tent as your shelter. Now, the next thing that I wish I knew about hammock camping is all of the finicky little things that go into getting a good setup. And part of that is understanding how far apart my trees need to be for the hammock that I'm using. If I've got an 11-foot hammock or a 12-foot hammock, or how wide the hammock is, there's so many different things. And the reason I'm holding trekking poles is I have seen people use trekking poles as an option of being able to say, hold these out side to side, and that will give you the distance of how far apart your trees need to be. Now, short of carrying a measuring tape out there in the backcountry, like, you're kind of guesstimating, and I feel like over time, with anything, you're going to figure it out. You're going to realize, yeah, okay, this is how far apart the trees need to be, and I can walk a distance, and that's going to help me figure that out. Something I thought was really interesting with the concept of using a hammock for your shelter system is now I got to figure out where to put my gear. And when I've got a backpack full of gear, and I've got all the little tiny things and stuff, like, sure, I can put those in my pack, but then do I just put my pack on the ground? And if it rains, is that water just gonna rush through and then get my pack all wet? Do I just put it on the tree? Or like, what are the true options of where my gear is supposed to go, as opposed to having a tent where I can just put it inside? There's just things about it that are a little confusing of where do you actually put your gear to keep it dry and protected and out of the elements when you don't have the space that you would normally have in a tent on the ground to put your gear. Now, obviously, I spend a lot of time watching YouTube, and I have several friends of mine that are avid hammock campers, and they talk about ridgeline organizers very often in their videos and how helpful a ridgeline organizer is. And I thought to myself, is it really that big of a deal to have like separate compartments to put your things? But when you've got a phone, you've got a GPS device, you've got other little things that you want to have access to super easy in the night instead of putting it down inside of your hammock with you, a ridgeline organizer is very helpful. And I'm still trying to figure out which one I need to have to put with my particular hammock system. So if you have suggestions, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to pick something up that is worth my time and is a nice organizer. I know that they're super simple and basic, but it would be nice to get some help with that. So leave that down in the comments to help me out with what I should get for a ridgeline organizer so that I can better organize those small things that I want to have access to while I'm in my hammock. The next thing I want to talk about is just the fact that I didn't realize that my sleep was going to be so different than sleeping on the ground. And what I mean by that is when you're sleeping at home, you have a routine. You fall asleep the same way pretty much every single night. Like for me, I roll over to my left side or I lay on my back and I fall asleep that way. And when you're in a hammock, it's a completely different experience. And even though in these gathered end hammocks, you are in a pretty flat lay, but I have noticed that it doesn't really matter. You still have a little bit of a bow of your body in the hammock. And so your sleep is different, and I feel a bit more constricted in my shoulders and my knees are together. Just overall, it's harder for me to fall asleep initially, but in the few times that I have slept in a hammock, it's been quite comfortable and enjoyable, but I do find myself waking up and tossing and turning a little bit more because it's just different than what my body is used to. The next thing is when you have spent so much time sleeping in a tent and then you are out in a hammock with an open-ended tarp, the level of exposure that you feel in that shelter is a lot more than zipping the zippers closed on a vestibule and getting inside of your tent and just having that little home away from home inside of your tent. And so that feeling of just feeling a bit more exposed in a hammock is really different. And when you lay at night and it's completely dark out and you can feel the wind moving through your tarp and you feel the air moving and you're swaying back and forth, that sounds like a dream and really exciting. And it's very comfortable, but there is a level of exposure that is different about being in a hammock that is potentially a little unsettling, and it took some time for me to get used to that the few times that I've been out, to just like, okay, I'm not in my tent. This is just different, and that's okay. For some of you that spend a lot of time in a hammock, you're probably gonna roll your eyes and be like, dude, it's really not that bad. But something that I have noticed about being in a hammock that is just so different from using a tent is how much more finicky and things that have to be set up with a hammock to make it work the way that it needs to. And I'm talking about like your tarp and the way that your tarp gets set up and how high it is off the ground, and then your suspension system. I want to talk about this for a minute because this is something that I feel like if I had known way ahead of time what the right suspension system would be for my hammock to get the best lay possible and the best setup possible, I would have ditched these daisy chain straps that come with the hammock gear and moved to a different system a lot sooner. And honestly, I get overwhelmed with the number of options of things that you can use with a hammock to set everything up. Cinch straps, daisy chains, whoopee slings, Beckett hitches, and like all of the little titanium hardware things you can get from Dutchware and like other companies. But what I moved to and will be using this year, I just got these a couple weeks ago. These are some cinch buckles from Autumn Ultralight. And so I'm replacing the daisy chains to hopefully just have better adjustment with the cinch buckle than I have with the daisy chain. And so hopefully that provides a little bit less setup time and everything. But I have noticed that I spend way more time getting everything dialed in and exactly where it needs to be. The trees are further apart than they were the last time that I was out, and now I got to figure out how to do that. And the trees are not on level ground, and so I got to figure out where the strap needs to be. Is my head end lower than my foot end, or vice versa? Like all those things that just go into getting a good lay in a hammock that takes some time to figure out. And I have a lot of respect for people that are like, oh yeah, super easy. I've done this 1,000 times and you just do this, this, and this. But that's come from time spent in the backcountry and understanding those processes and how to really dial it in. It's not the same as a tent. We'll just say that. And so it's been a huge learning curve to try to figure that out for myself. So this is where I want you to join the conversation and leave a comment down below. I want you to tell me if you have been hammock camping and what would be the biggest thing that you have learned that has made your hammock camping experience better. I want to be able to learn from that, and hopefully it will help other people in the comment section. So comment down below with what has made your hammock camping experience better that you have learned from being out there using a hammock system. Thanks for watching today, guys. If you are not subscribed to the channel, you know what to do. Hope you have an awesome day. See you later.